Good.
Right.
Fantastic.
You need to do that in front of the cameras, though.
Just in case. All right, so here we are at Lagan's in Green Park in London. I am with...
We're going to go again, because here he comes.
Yes. Thank you. Cheers, thank you very much.
Thanks, I'm in need this morning. Thank you. Cheers.
Perfect timing.
You don't drink coffee, or you do?
No, I don't. I never like the taste of it. Perfect. All right, so here we are at Lagan's, upstairs at Lagan's, actually, near Green Park in London. I am with the one and only Gary Kemp. Hey. How's it going?
Oh, good, thank you, Spencer.
Thank you so much for coming on Chaplin Talks. I really appreciate it. No, I really do.
You're welcome. I met you in July, I think it was.
In July, yes.
We were on tour. I was on tour with Nick Mason, Source Full of Secrets.
Yes.
And the first thing I said to Nick when we were getting to Montreal.
Montreux.
Sorry, Montreux.
In Switzerland, yeah.
I know. We went to Montreal as well.
Okay.
And we get to Montreux was, the Chaplin Museum's around here. We've got to go and see it. And I think he had some connection with a racing car driver who knew your dad. And
yeah, I was going to ask how that came about. So whose idea was it to come to the museum?
It was mine.
It was yours.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I thought that because
I just, I've always had a fascination with Charlie, and so it was. I thought that was a good opportunity, and Nick was really into the idea as well. So before I knew it, we were actually getting shown around by your dad, which was a great first-hand thrill, for us.
Yes. Was it not the racing car driver? It was Jackie Stewart's son or something,
yes,
right?
Right.
It was something that got in contact with my dad, I think.
Yeah, and I found it really extraordinary as we drove up to the house.
Yeah.
And you go through, what is the name of the town above the hill? Is that
still? Corsier.
And there's sort of blocks of flats that are around there. And there's a huge mural of your grandfather right across the side of one of the blocks of flats.
Yes.
He's really treasured in that area, isn't he?
Completely. I played for the unveiling of those paintings, actually, right in front of there, and there was a huge crowd of people. It was unbelievable, and still to this day, I'm pretty taken aback about how much they really took him as one of his own in that town, considering he came from America, where he'd been living for such a long time, to go into Bhebhe, Switzerland, and then just be.
Well, I wonder
accepted.
if that was a sense of freedom that he represented, because obviously he left America, during that time of McCarthyism, didn't he? Mm-hmm. And the fact that they, saw him as, being extremely anti-fascist, and that maybe that was why he was embraced by Europe so much. And he was, of course, European. Yeah,
completely. What struck me about doing this, walking around with you guys at the museum, all of you, like Nick, he's a quiet guy. Very nice, very, very nice guy. And you could see him taking it all in. But you were just asking questions left, right, and center. And that's when I could tell, actually, I knew you knew your Chaplin stuff just by the questions you were asking.
Yeah. No, I went through a period of quite a few years ago of really falling in love with Chaplin and looking a lot of all the early shorts and the restored early shorts. And then, of course, the movies. And reading his autobiography, I think it was, I grew up with him in my life, but as a kid, I never connected. He was just there, he was on TV every weekend, and clips, or if I went to what was called Saturday morning pictures in those days, they'd sometimes still show him. Because of course you can be so young and laugh at Charlie. Right, because there's no dialogue, there's no words to understand. It's Absolutely. Not a gag, it's all visual. And I remember, showing my son one of the films years ago, and him sort of being 2 years old and really laughing as he falls over, or the hut was going
Yes.
tipping, or then he was going from side to side, and what was that film? What was the
Gold Rush.
Yeah, the Gold Rush, of course. Yeah, which is the great one where I think he's eating.
He's eating a shoe.
His shoes as shoelaces as spaghetti. I mean, always playing on the impoverished, wasn't he? I mean, always. He was a great. In a way, it was kind of Dickensian. He was speaking up for the poor man.
Oh, completely.
All the time. But anyway, so I remember he was there, but I didn't really fully understand him. And then much later on, a bit like with the Beatles, right? So I grew up with the Beatles there in the background, but I didn't buy my first record until they'd split up. So I wasn't interested in the Beatles. I was moving forward, interested in what was happening. Then I reached a stage in your life and you think, I need to check this stuff out again.
Yes.
And Charlie sort of was therapy for a while for me. I would watch his films and, just adore that physicality that he was expressing. But can I also say that I think it was because of my parents and my father, his background. He connected with musical theatre in a very sort of visceral way, because we grew up in Islington in London, and there was a very famous music hall there called Collins Music Hall.
Okay.
And my dad was very poor. His father couldn't work because he'd been injured in the First World War. And his grandfather on his mother's side drove a hansom cab, right? And he was quite a cool guy called John Crisp, and he had this great moustache, and he used to chuck sweets apparently out to the kids as they, my dad tells me, as he drove the cab along the horse, and and my dad was born above the stables in this sort of taxi rank, if you like, and they were that poor that they had to do other jobs. So one of the things they did was they managed to find nuts and sweets from some wholesaler, put them in bags, and my dad and his brother Percy would spend ages putting them in bags, and they'd go and sell them to the queues outside the music hall.
How interesting.
So that connection with musical made me fascinated in musical, and then reading about Charlie and how he started in English music hall, and thinking he probably played the Collins, and how that's where he became a real star, and his Englishness, his London working class background. That's what I relate to.
With my grandfather's films, like you say with children, they can watch it, they find it hilarious, and there's this whole thing of, anyone can watch it and it's funny. But there's also so much more to his films. As you get older, you start to realize the messages that he was sending. And actually, it wasn't all funny. He was also kind of speaking about real life, his real life experiences. There's a film called The Immigrant, which I don't know if you have seen, but it's one of his earlier films. And there's a scene where they're all in a boat arriving in New York.
Yes, of course.
And he kicks one of the immigration officers in the ass, basically. He kicks him in the backside. And it was so controversial back then.
Really? Wow.
It was just like, you cannot do that to an official policeman, and you got into big trouble for it.
But he was always thumbing his nose at authority within the films, wasn't he? It was always that case, and sticking up for the poor man. And I think because music hall was the poor man's theatre.
Yeah, completely.
If you were richer, you went to the opera or the ballet, but you went to music hall, and it was crammed. I mean, there are some famous paintings by Sickert from at the turn of the century, last century, of people crammed up in the music hall, in God's smoke everywhere, and just all sort of leaning over, looking at whoever might be on stage, maybe the female artist. But when you read what they did on those stages with Fred Carno, they had ice rinks, and there'd be there was a famous decorating one where they were all falling off ladders.
Yes. Exactly.
And Charlie, of course, was the drunk often in the balcony, right? In one of the
he was
playing a drunk toff, who'd suddenly just roll out of the balcony of the, what would we call them, the ashtrays in theatre, those little 2 or 3 seater seats.
Oh yeah, exactly. The boxes sort of thing. Yeah.
The boxes, and he would just suddenly be hanging out, and everyone would scream, and then realize it was a gag, and he would keep going. I mean, he had, in the same way that the Beatles went to Hamburg and Berlin and did their sort of 10,000 hours
Yes.
of work before they became famous. He'd done his 10,000 hours with I guess not just with Fred Karno, but with other producers as well. And right from, like, I think he started when he was 8.
I was going to say he started at a very, very young age. Because, I mean, his parents were performers. And actually, interesting that he was playing a drum, because Charlie Sr., my great-grandfather, he performed in all these shows, theaters around London. And I think back in those days, you're kind of expected after the show to go out and have a drink with the audience and all that. And he just took it too far, to be honest.
Yeah, I remember he didn't come home till late.
Charlie didn't see his dad barely. I mean, he didn't.
But was it his mother who got him onto the stage?
Yes, it was. She couldn't perform one night, so he just went out on stage, started singing, and it just went down. And I think he says that moment of being on stage and people clapping for him is what changed his life and made him realize, actually, that's what he needs to do.
So I think, in many ways, he was the first working class hero, wasn't he? Because I doubt if there were many working class people who were as famous as him, who became as famous internationally as him. Before then, I can't imagine it. I think being the beginning of movies, the fact that a Charlie film could make its way down into the middle of Africa, and someone could put up a blanket and screen it on a sheet or something.
It's so true.
And people would laugh because there was no language barrier. But, you see those crowds, when he comes back to London and what he represented. It's very similar to the Beatles in that sense.
It's very true. What's interesting as well, Nick Rhodes, so I interviewed Nick Rhodes a while back and he was talking about this. So obviously there's no social media. There's no, the news takes a while to catch up. So he's on a train from, I think it's LA to New York. It's something like that. And at every stop, he sees a crowd, but he doesn't realize it's for him. Man. And each stop gets busier and busier, and they're screaming, "Charlie, I want to see you, I want to see you." And then he realizes, oh my God, that's for me. And that was the first time he really realized that, actually, I've done something here.
Well, I remember reading something like this, that the image of the little tramp, the silhouette, as it were, was as famous globally, only second to Jesus Christ on a cross.
Really? Oh, I've never heard that.
Well, if you think about it, everybody knows that tramp. With the stick and the bowler hat and the big shoes. And there probably wasn't an image of a human being as better known, other than the one I said.
Yeah.
I wrote an article for a newspaper a year or so ago when Mick Jagger was 80, and I said probably the only image that's become as powerful as that now, other than Coca-Cola, is the lips of Jagger, the Rolling Stones' mouth and the tongue. But what a position to be in, and to have that kind of power for your grandfather. How do you deal with that? Do you think it was overwhelming, or do you? No, I mean, hardly. No wonder America wanted to get rid of him at one point.
Yes,
but
it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think I know he was a very strong-minded person, so I think whatever he had envisaged in his mind, I think he just did whatever he wanted to do, sort of thing. Whether it was a lot of pressure for him and stuff, I don't necessarily think so. I think he was very much a creative and just did what he wanted to do, and hopefully everyone else would follow him.
Yeah, I mean, his genius was in so many areas, wasn't it, really? I mean, because we spoke about the sort of big image of him, kicking authority up the arse, his physicality, his slapstick, which, the ice skating rink is still one of my absolute all-time favorites. When he looks like he's going back to fall and he keeps kicking his legs out.
That's in Modern Times,
Oh, is that in Modern Times?
Yes.
Yeah, so good. And I think he did it in a short before Modern Times, maybe.
Yeah, there's also one called The Rink.
The Rink
as well. And then he's one of those like a roller he's on roller skates and he's meant to be a waiter serving people,
Oh,
and he's just
that's
causing
right.
absolute chaos.
It's roller skates. Because I remember there's a really cute bit at the beginning, isn't there? Because he always had these really, gorgeous women and they're putting on their roller skates at the beginning. And there's obviously some sexuality about it as well, because that's about all they can show. But he had the big gestures, but also he had the close-up subtlety. Because I think what really made him a star was when they cut to he cut as the director to his face on close-up, and just how cute he could be. His whether it's feeling hurt or in love. I mean, his in love face was always great, right?
Yeah.
And I think that charming quality in close-up, which he would never have learned in musical theatre, in music hall, is where was one of his great skills. But then to go on and to really push the boundaries of directing, I mean, in all kinds of, in screen paints, where
Exactly. That's the rollerblading thing you're talking about.
Yeah,
exactly. It was painted on a screen.
Yeah.
Special effects before, VFX even existed. So it was pretty.
And then like the escalators,
Yes.
and then you realize, and then when I read, was his absolute obsession with detail, how he could do a scene endlessly. I mean, the famous sort of, I think it's the blind girl with
City Lights.
City Lights. I mean, how many times he did that? He was looking for something over and over and over.
That's the world record for the most takes in a movie. And it's something like 243 takes for one specific scene.
But she must have put up with that. Or did she walk off set at some stage?
No, they didn't get along very well. And apparently he would, not that it's very nice, but apparently he would kind of yell at her and try and, because my grandfather was very much someone, if he wanted you to do something, he would show you how to do it. He would say, okay, he would act out the part and say, do it like this. So he knew exactly how he wanted things. And some actors didn't work that way. One famously was Marlon Brando on my granddad's last film, Countess from Hong Kong. He just couldn't handle my granddad. They did not get along. And it's on City Lights, it was a similar situation. And they had a falling out, and then he had to beg her to come back. He went on his knees, begged her to come back on set, and they finished the film.
But I think it was his obsession with detail that made him the genius that he is, and why the films were so good, and that he was willing to, never accept anything less than perfection in his head.
Yeah.
And in a way, reminds me of say like a great producer like Trevor Horn.
Yeah.
Who or Mutt Lange, who are famous for like spending days just doing the hi-hat.
Exactly.
But getting it exactly how they want.
Yeah, it's so true. There's a particular part in City Lights where he spent years thinking about how is the blind girl going to mistake a tramp for being a rich man. And he spent, I think, 2-3 years trying to come up with this concept of it's got to be done right. We need to find the right way. And the way it comes across in the film now is she hears a fancy car. It's like a Rolls Royce or something.
That's right. Yeah,
the door
shuts.
Shuts. So she hears that sound and then thinks that he's coming from the car.
You see, but he's in a way, it's a kind of socialism that he's got already in his heart. That he's saying, you'll only despise me because you think I'm poor or the way I look.
Exactly.
But my generosity and my what I am as a human being, you're denying. But if you couldn't see me, then you'd accept it more.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that was a great statement, wasn't it? And you can see why, McCarthy went after him and.
Yeah, especially the later years. So I don't know if you remember in the museum, there's one particular room, and it's kind of got like a world map around it, and it's got one of his travel trunks. And that room is to kind of show, because he took a few years out of making films to go travel. And he traveled for about a year or so, and he went everywhere, absolutely everywhere.
Meet Gandhi or something.
Yeah, he met Gandhi here in London.
Oh, right, okay.
And then, but he went to like Japan, where someone tried to assassinate him, to all these different places, China, absolutely everywhere. And once he came back from that trip, I think he started to realize how the world was things were changing, and that's when when he wrote Modern Times, and after that he had The Great Dictator. So they're both his most, political films.
Yeah.
Yeah. So once those films came out, I think that's when he started to get into trouble.
I mean, I think what we have to remember is the utter poverty he came from. You know, what London was like at that time in the working class slum areas that, he would have, he sort of grew up in, right? That's that's his background. I mean, maybe it lent towards theatre, but it nevertheless, there's some great bits in the autobiography where he just walks through London a lot and he describes what he sees, going home.
It's so good. And by the age of 7, he had something like 10 different jobs. He was a glass blower. He was working different machines. He was just getting any job he could just to get by. But there's stories of him sitting in Kennington Park, scrunching up a piece of paper with his brother and kicking it around because that was his football. Right. Eating beef dripping with stale bread. That was their dinner, But in a way, America also embraced him because he was the absolute epitome of the American dream, right? So he arrives in America completely
poor.
So true.
And then becomes unbelievably wealthy and successful, changes his accent,
Yeah, so true.
Yeah.
There aren't really any recordings of my granddad's what you'd call a Cockney London accent.
But I guess that's what he had, right?
Oh no, he did, and at some point it changed. But all the recordings that there are all of his.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Accent.
I think if you want to succeed in theatre, I mean, my voice changed. I did movies when I was 11 for the Children's Film Foundation for Saturday Morning Pictures.
Okay,
where I saw your dad, so your grandfather. I mean. Yeah. And so I as a child actor made films that would be shown on those morning pictures for kids, and there's one that the BFI bought that you can get now called Hide and Seek. It's on YouTube.
Yeah,
and that's my real voice. That's my Cockney voice. And that's the voice of my parents.
I'm going to look that up.
That's the voice of my parents. And then as I became, I ended up going to grammar school. I started mixing with middle class people in the music business, and then I think when I wanted to really succeed more as an actor, probably at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, after doing The Craze, I worked hard at trying to get my voice to be more neutral.
Okay.
Because you think, well, you're not going to get parts in plays or outside of being working class.
I see what you mean.
You need to be. Am I going to do theatre?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's the sort of thing that your grandfather would have worked on to be able to communicate better.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
I think accents are really weird anyway, aren't they? Because if you watch an old film of a documentary it was the Beatles, 64 has just been on, and they interview all the kids outside the Plaza Hotel in 1964, and they're all these American New York kids, but they have the voices of old people.
Yeah.
Because their accent has stayed the same, and now they've become old, and that's what we're used to. Young people have a completely different accent. The Cockney working class accent that I grew up with doesn't exist anymore. That only exists in the mouths of people my age.
Yeah.
And it's so other kids. It's always morphing and developing.
It's so true. And England's quite special for that, I think, because it's quite a big country. But I mean, you go up north, it's so different to the accent you'd get down here. You go to the West Country or you go to Wales or whatever. It's amazing on one little island, the different.
What's interesting about those old movies that your grandfather made in the beginning, with the big fat nemesis he always had. He was Scottish, that guy. There were so many from Britain.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, he went over on the boat with Stan Laurel, didn't he?
Yes. Yeah, he did. What's interesting as well is that they don't really write about each other. Apart from Stan Laurel, I think he wrote a book kind of saying not nice things about my granddad.
Oh, I didn't know that. How dare he?
Yeah, so my grandfather's... I
love Stan Laurel, though.
Yeah, and my grandfather's autobiography doesn't mention him.
That's amazing.
And people kind of wonder why, and
that's amazing.
There's different theories, but one of them is that maybe he was hurt by some of the words that Stan Laurel said.
Yeah. Of course, they succeeded a little bit later, didn't they, with when talkies were happening more.
Yeah, they were incredible, though. I think the studios just owned them, though. That was the problem, as if my dad just built his own studio.
Yeah.
So I think back in those days, you're expected to make 5 pictures a week, 5 films a week, sometimes more. And I think they really had it tough, weren't allowed to do what they wanted as well.
Yeah. My favorite Laurel and Hardy is definitely where they have to fix the boat up.
Yeah.
Because his head caught
So
behind
talented,
the
the guys.
Yeah.
Did you watch the Steve Coogan film?
Yeah, I did.
I thought that was great as well.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Much later on, wasn't it?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. You know what? I remember when I just remembered I worked in LA. I had to mix my own solo album years ago, my first solo album in 1994.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, where do you want to mix it? And I went, I want to go to A&M Studios. Because I wanted to sort of be on the lot that your grandfather created. Because I just thought that spirit, it's got to be still around somewhere. Because, people who don't know, obviously, I think it was like Herb Output and his partner. He was the A in A&M.
Yeah.
And bought the Chaplin film.
The lot, yeah, exactly. And apparently I haven't been, actually. My dad has been. But it remains very much the same as when it was built.
Those same old 1915 sort of buildings or whatever they were.
Yeah. What I find interesting about that studio as well is obviously it's in prime location in LA. But when my grandfather moved to Switzerland, he was forced to basically sell it all. So my grandmother went over to try and rescue everything he had, and they just sold everything. It's thanks to her that he had anything after this.
Really?
After America, yeah.
Did he earn money from his films in perpetuity? Do you know?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, every single film that he did is owned by the family. Like there's no.
But that's good.
Yeah. So for us, it's great.
He kept the rights. He kept the
rights completely to. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a very astute guy. Yeah.
He's very smart. That's why he started United Artists as well. I don't think you could put my grandfather's life into a movie. There's obviously that great movie Chaplin with Robert Downey Jr., but it goes through so much of his life very fast. He had so much happen in his life that I think you'd need different parts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm surprised actually it isn't now a kind of box set on Netflix or something.
Well, actually, we're working on it.
Oh, okay. It's all about finding the right guy, isn't it? Because or the couple of guys, because he's obviously got a few guys because he's going to get older.
Hopefully in the next few years there'll be something.
That's exciting because they're doing the Beatles right now, aren't they? They're doing it 4 films with Sam Mendes is directing 4 films. So Paul, John, Ringo, George, with really amazing actors doing each of these guys.
So I have to bring it up because I do have to thank you, and I really mean this from the bottom of my heart, for helping to organize for myself and my dad to go on, which is David Gilmour's studio boat called the Astoria. But the Astoria was once owned by Fred Carnot, who discovered my grandfather, took him to America. So there's all this history there. And you helped us get on that boat. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing boat, isn't it? I mean, a beautiful sort of Edwardian, I don't know what kind of boat you'd call it. I don't know what kind of...
It's one of a kind.
It's a houseboat anyway. It doesn't move.
There's no engine on it.
And it's beautiful wood and carpentry and
all untouched
brass and everything, and it has this deck at the top with a little kind of veranda over it, which was apparently Carnot built to have an orchestra playing up there.
Yeah, completely. Apparently the whole roof he could have something like a 200-piece orchestra, something ridiculous.
Yeah,
I mean it was extravagant, but one of a kind, remains highly untouched.
But just to have it in the hands of someone who's an equal to Charlie as far as being an entertainer, a global entertainer, as David Gilmour. Yeah,
I mean the fact that they recorded the last 2 Pink Floyd albums on there as well.
That's right. There's all sort of rumors that people that at one point someone came up the side of them in a rowboat and tried to fix a little microphone to the side of the boat to hear what Floyd were doing. I mean, what did Carnot think of Charlie's career? Or did he, I don't know when he died, Carnot, do you know?
I'm not too sure. It's a good question. I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
I would imagine, I've never heard, I think if he said bad things, I probably would have heard about it. So I would imagine that he was quite proud. And there's a section in my grandfather's autobiography where he talks about going back to the boat to see Fred Carnot. So he goes to that boat in particular, which was, it was sort of, emotional for me, which I didn't expect, seeing my dad sit in the same place where my grandfather would have been all those years ago. And I got these great photos. And then there's a particular room that my granddad stayed in as well, which is, the bed is really short. I guess people were shorter back then. Not that he was a tall guy, but just seeing all that stuff, it was just very, very special.
Because what we don't talk about is you've got another famous grandfather.
Right? Yeah, a great-grandfather.
Great-grandfather.
Yeah, Eugene O'Neill.
I mean, man, can you give other people a chance?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about Eugene O'Neill is that he was more or less the same age as my grandfather.
Right.
So when my grandmother decided to marry Charlie, it didn't go down very well with Eugene O'Neill. But she was kind of like this socialite hipster on the New York scene, going to Studio 54 and all these places.
Yeah.
And she used to hang out with Truman Capote and Gloria Vanderbilt.
Right.
And Walter Matthau's wife, Carol Matthau.
Okay.
And the three of them, they all used to go hang out. And then they would go to the early hours of the morning and they'd go stand outside Tiffany's and they'll look in the window eating their croissants and all whatever. And apparently that's where Truman Capote got the inspiration, was just his experience.
For breakfast at Tiffany's.
Yeah. From the three of them. So partly my grandmother, partly.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
What a family. What a legacy.
Yeah.
And where did your grandfather meet her?
They met in America. She was auditioning for a movie for him. And then I think she got to the audition. He was like...
He was very much her type, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
He was. But you know what? I think by the time he met my grandmother, he went through so much... I don't know, so much... I wouldn't call it trauma, but like, you know, he was under the watchful eye of the press for a lot of things. I mean, to the point where they were bugging his phone. The FBI were bugging his phone. They were going through his mail.
Yeah,
they were trying to find anything to...
The blacklist was quite big in those days as well.
Yeah.
And
so he kind of went through all of that stuff and he met my grandmother and they just settled and they just got along so well. Honestly, if you speak to my dad, he will say they could not be separated from each other at all.
And they had a lot of children for him late in life. And that's what's so, you know, I think kept him alive in a way, that
completely.
Youth. I've got a 12-year-old, you know, and I'm 65, you know, so that's...
So you understand a little bit.
Yeah, I think it keeps you young. But also, you know, I saw Mick Jagger the other day, right? He sees himself as a young man all the time.
He does.
In images. So he's always looking at that. And when he goes on stage, that's who he is again. He's that young person. That's the character he's playing. I remember reading somewhere that they did this... They went into a care home and did a kind of survey thing, an experiment of some sort, where they got, for quite a while, the old people in the care home to just act out their youth, to be young, to play at being young, like actors. And they found that all their health problems started to go.
That's so interesting.
So, you know, I think it helps to, you know, your grandfather would have seen himself as a young person. He was very much, you know, that was all his life. And there he was, a dad again, you know.
And going to Switzerland was a blessing for him, I think, in that sense, because he just spent time with his family.
Honestly, the gift that I had that day was so beautiful, just to have his son showing us around the house and the incredible museum you've got there. Yeah,
no, they've done a really, really, really nice job. And for anyone that goes to see it, there's, you know, obviously there's the house, as it pretty much was. And then there's the studio bit where you can go in and see some of the film sets and how things were done.
Oh, it's brilliant.
Very interactive.
Absolutely brilliantly done.
Yeah.
And I mean, a real feast for the eyes as well.
Yeah.
Waxwork stuff. And,
exactly.
Yeah, no, it's great. And even if you have kids who have never seen Charlie Chaplin before, if you go there, they will get it.
Yeah, it's very interactive. That's the aim, is to get kids involved, you know. So going slightly off topic here. I was speaking to a friend of mine, and I told him you were coming on the show. Turns out he's a massive Spandau Ballet fan, and he was like, God, you know Gary Kemp? He wrote every single hit for Spandau Ballet, lyrics and music. Is that true?
Yeah, I wrote, yeah,
wow.
And true.
Yeah, and true.
But I was the sole songwriter in the band. I started out writing my first song when I was 11. My mum and dad bought me a guitar for Christmas, which was a really weird thing for them to do. I had no idea. I wanted a toy, and also a little book by a guitarist called Bert Weedon. It was called Bert Weedon's Play in a Day, and I pretty much started picking the guitar up straight away. But I just wasn't interested in playing anyone else's songs. I remember really distinctly having this book, and there was a song, If I Had a Hammer in there or something. 4 chords. I learned the chords. I started singing the song. I thought, I really like these chords, but I don't like the song. So I just sang a different melody over the top of those chords. Then I wrote some words. Before I knew it, I had a few songs. And I used to love that I could go into my bedroom and with nothing and come out with something that I owned that was free.
I see what you mean.
And these songs were sort of bigger than me in a way, because then I could go and perform them, which I did at my school or in front of my family. And the songs would get applauded, as it were, you know. So it was like a armory that I could build up in a very short space of time, of a power of sort of impressing people, writing songs and impressing myself. And the second song I wrote was called Alone.
Okay.
Right? And my mum said, you can't play that to anyone, they'll think you're depressed. But maybe I was a bit, and I was writing about it.
You're writing your feelings. Yeah, completely. Do the songs come naturally to you, would you say? Or are you someone that, like my grandfather, that has to, spend months writing a line for a song?
It's different. When I was writing for Spandau Ballet, it got harder as I went along because the pressure built up to pay the mortgages and keep everybody happy. So I found I lacked a lot of autonomy at that point. The songs weren't for me anymore. They were always felt like they were more and more for other people. And I think that pressure did build a bit, especially being the only songwriter in the band. I felt as I went through later into the sort of the end of Spandau Ballet in the 80s, that the songs became more personal to me and then harder to give away for Tony to sing.
Yeah.
But I think I got better at writing songs. I started to understand structure more. But when I write on my own, I go through phases. So when Spandau split up for the first time in sort of 1990, and I started doing movies, I thought, I don't need to write anymore. I don't need to make music anymore. I'm going to be an actor, because I started off as a child actor. I'm going to be an actor. And, I don't want to be involved in pop music anymore. I think about 4 years went by and my marriage broke down. And I was really devastated by my marriage breaking down. And the first thing I picked up was my guitar. And I hadn't taken it out of the box for quite a few years.
Okay.
And I started writing. And I wrote what became my first solo album called Little Bruises. And of course it was about what I was going through, you know, but not in a maudlin sense. I think it was more, I try and write with a glass half full. You know?
I see what you mean, yeah.
There's no point writing about being down. I'm trying to write myself through being down, and try and find some positivity out of it. And so I realized that that's really what writing is for me now as a solo artist. Even on this last album, it's just about to come out January the 31st, I think it is.
Okay, exciting.
If people are watching this late. So it's a kind of therapy for me always to work my way through any anxiety or concerns.
Yeah. It sounds like it's very natural to you.
Yes.
You tend to write about what you're going through at the moment.
It's what I do. I mean, this album's called This Destination. The first song I wrote for this album was called Take the Wheel, and I really felt in a space of high anxiety at that point. I think it was coming out of COVID and doom scrolling and the world, and we're also, we're polluted by information so much more than we ever were. And because it is so quick, it gets to us around the globe so quickly. And because the world seems so small, and because I travel a lot around that world, it feels like it's happening right next door to me all the time. So I think all of us feel that pressure much more than we ever did.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was writing myself out of that anxiety that I had.
Okay.
And I got to the end, and the last song I wrote for the album was called This Destination, and it's a song about realizing that music is where I go. That's my destination. Wherever I am, it's always there, and I should go, and I need to go back to it. And I wrote it as a kind of love song, really, but that was really what it was about.
Do you have a favorite song on the album, so I can listen to it after this?
I really like the first one, Take the Wheel. I think that was, I wrote it as a film noir kind of setting. And I was the sort of detective trying to work out who the bad guy was. But that's all in my head.
Yeah.
And there's a woman in it, of course, who's my wife. And I'm asking her to help me out here and take anybody to take the wheel. Sometimes you feel like that, right?
Okay.
Someone else take control. Someone else take, and when I say take control, I mean of my emotions, because my wife is very, very good at running the house, running everything, running all our lives.
Yeah.
But you're ever in that situation where you just feel out of control and you can't drive anymore. So I think that was where I was trying to put where I was.
So you say you've done some acting, like you did The Craze, obviously.
I did The Bodyguard as well after that.
Oh yeah, you did The Body. Yeah, it's so true. Yeah.
I did a film called Killing Zoe that Tarantino produced.
Amazing.
Which I really enjoyed.
Do you enjoy acting?
I like theatre acting the best. Over the last sort of 7 years, I've done some Pinter in the West End with a really great director called Jamie Lloyd.
Yeah.
Who's currently got, I think, Sunset Boulevard on Broadway.
Oh, really? Yeah, that's doing really well. Yeah.
He's amazing. And I really enjoyed that. I do love acting. I don't like it as much as songwriting. I like songwriting the best.
Okay.
Because that's me. That's me creating something from scratch. And when you're an actor, you are told what to do a lot.
Yeah.
Unless you're Charlie Chaplin, of course. Then you just tell yourself what to do, right? But I like the nuance of doing the same thing over and over again. That's why I like theatre acting. That's why I like being on stage with a band, playing with Nick. It's quite a complicated set of songs we have to do.
I was going to ask, yeah.
Like Echoes and Atom Heart Mother or whatever. And the detail it's you just want one night for everything to be perfect.
Yes.
But that's never going to happen, right? Never going to happen in anyone's stage career. So the next night you try and achieve it, and the next night you try and achieve it, and you come off stage and you say, we just messed up a bit there, or we didn't do that quite right. Or, oh my God, wasn't that amazing? That's never happened before.
Yeah.
That little bit there where it all bloomed. So I think with acting, you're trying to achieve the same thing. But also what I like about it is I know what I'm doing every day for at least 3 months,
Yeah.
And I like that order. I like having that. Like I've got something to do today, and I'm not.
It's a comfort, isn't it?
Yeah, because sometimes when I'm I'm just around the house. I'm around the house a lot, and I think my little kids just what does your dad do for a living? He sort of looks in the fridge. That's sort of.
Obviously, you have young kids. Do they know their dad was in Spandau Ballet?
When I went for dinner with my son last night. It was my wife's birthday. We all went out for dinner. And so there was my 12-year-old, my 15-year-old, and my 20-year-old. And we started talking about, what they were going to do. And then my 15-year-old said, I remember the exact moment I found out my dad was in a band and that had sold a lot of records, and he said, you were taking me to school, Mum, and we were going up that hill at Primrose Hill. I remember we were driving up and Dad's record was on the radio.
Wow.
And you said, that's your dad's song.
How cool.
And he said, he said to me, I remember feeling so excited at that moment. And I went into school and I was telling all my friends.
That's so cool. Yeah.
So
I would imagine that.
But I do feel like maybe I've let them down because that sort of moment in my life, which was so extreme, and every band, whoever they are, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, anybody, Dylan, everyone has that youthful moment when they are the champion of their world, right?
I see what you mean.
that I felt sorry for him because it was like that was before he was born.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know if I think being born into a family anyway, with my grandfather and stuff, I don't feel like I necessarily missed out. I think as long as they know what you've done. And I think your songs are probably of a generation. I mean, like, it's the sound of a generation, though, that music. That
Well, this same son of mine, he's a big Arsenal fan, and I take him over the Arsenal. And just recently, you know, we had a footballer called Zinchenko playing for us, and they had adapted one of my songs, Gold, to sing with his name.
Oh, really?
And yeah, on my Instagram, you can see there's a footage of me at Wembley when we'd beat Man City, and all of the Arsenal fans are singing Gold. And of course, I'm just sitting there. They don't know who I am anyway. Most of the,
That's so funny.
And I just like pan my little phone or camera around, and I see my son who's 15, and he's put his hood up, and he's just burying himself in the chair.
That's so fun. Actually, on your Instagram, I saw. I think you were in Italy or somewhere, and there was a busker playing one. I think he was playing Gold as well. Then you put it up, and you're just there filming him, and he probably
it was in Germany. Yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. So, I have to ask you two random questions. Aim to make people laugh, because I'm working with a charity on this thing, and the aim is to make people laugh. So, have you had any embarrassing moments while performing or anything that you wouldn't mind sharing?
I've never sort of pooed myself or anything on
Yeah,
stage.
yeah.
I weed myself. I do know someone who has, actually. I'm going to remain nameless. But off the top of my head, I mean, I remember in the very early days, in the early 80s, when the whole neoromantic thing was happening, and we were all wearing fairly bizarre clothes, but none more bizarre than this, because it was very hot and we were in Portugal. We played Lisbon the night before, and we were flying down to Porto. And it was hot, and, we just put on some little sports shorts and T-shirt. That's all we had on, flip-flops, whatever. Flew down, and our luggage didn't arrive. And we had a gig that night. And so we had no clothes. But we didn't realize, by the time we got there, it was too late to even go to the stores, and in Porto in 1981 isn't going to be, like, you're not going to find much. We were famous for like wearing these kind of really cool clothes, right?
Absolutely.
And the whole neoromantic thing, like Duran Duran. And so we're sitting in the hotel room. We don't know what to do. We're going to go on stage. My brother said, I know. So he took all we all took all the bed sheets, the white bed sheets off our beds, and we made like togas out of these bed sheets. And, like Martin tied a torn bed sheet around his head, and I had sheet going around me. We went on stage wearing togas.
Oh, wow.
But I felt pretty embarrassed by it all, really. Anyway, so what happened is we had to go back to to Lisbon a few months later to do a TV show, and all these kids, these new romantic kids, met us at the airport wearing togas.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
that's so funny. Well, it worked then, obviously.
Yeah.
And did you? That's actually a very good story.
Yeah.
So, last question, because I know you got to go. Do you have a favorite joke?
Oh my God, I'm useless at jokes.
Are you?
Oh no!
I thought maybe there'd be a musician joke or something.
No, and I'm really. Oh, you've caught me unawares, actually.
Okay.
I did have a really good joke recently, but then it's gone from my head and I've forgotten it. So I know I'm not very good at remembering.
I heard this joke, the stupidest joke I've ever heard. It's what's brown and sticky? A stick.
Okay. I tell my kids that. That's a dad joke.
It's a kid
right?
joke. Yeah, it's a dad joke. Yeah. All right. So what have you got going on?
So we've got this album coming out, This Destination, solo album. I don't know if I'm going to be going on the road with it yet. I haven't got any plans to play with Nick anymore, but but I'm sure we will with Source Full of Secrets. But Nick's 81 now. He's still got loads of energy.
He's
still plays like
unbelievable.
a
This
demon,
guy
right?
Flies planes, drives fast cars.
And of course, I do my podcast with Guy Pratt.
Absolutely.
Rockonteurs, which we
I love.
Different musicians on all the time, and we chat with them. And what else am I doing? What I do mostly is the school run.
Okay.
Helping bring 3 kids up.
Okay, amazing. Well, Gary, listen, thank you so much.
Oh, that's
honestly, I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure to talk about your grandfather.